Well, good afternoon, everyone, and a very warm welcome to this public talk on prayer-based solutions. It's hosted by Second Church of Christ Scientist here in Evanston. I'm very happy to introduce our speaker this afternoon, Larissa Snorek-Yates. Larry is from Boston, Massachusetts. She is a member of the Christian Science Board of Lectureship, and she's also a full-time Christian Science practitioner, which means she has a public practice devoted to Christian Science healing. The topic of today's talk is the healing power of stillness, finding peace in the midst of danger. Well, I don't know about you, but I find that particularly appropriate today. It seems like we're bombarded by competing sound bites and mixed messages. I've been very blessed to be brought up in the Christian Science Sunday school, where I've had many experiences and instances of experiencing that healing power of stillness in my own life. In fact, one of my favorite ideas from the Bible is from Isaiah. "Thine ears shall hear a word behind thee saying, this is the way, walk ye in it." To me, it's that still small voice that guides and comforts and indeed shepherds us. Just a couple of notes. Laurie will be taking some questions afterwards if you'd like to speak with her individually. And we also have a table here with some books and periodicals that is sponsored by our church, including Science and Health with Key to the Scriptures, written by Mary Baker Eddy, the discoverer and founder of Christian Science. Well, I know I'm looking forward to hearing today's talk, so please help me welcome Laurie.
Thanks so much, Gary. Hello, everybody.
Hi.
Nice to see you all this afternoon. And it's great for me to be back here in the Chicago area. I grew up about 30 miles west of here in Bartlett years ago, and it's just really nice to be back again. I arrived yesterday on the train, and as I got off the train, I was confronted by the St. Patrick's Day celebration here in Chicago. And as I was thinking about our talk and about the healing power of stillness, I was walking along the Chicago River, and I was noticing the little garden sort of boxes. You know, there's trees and these little brick boxes with gardening plantings in them. And most of it was still dead from the winter. But amidst sort of the dead leaves and things, there were a whole bunch of little tulip shoots poking up. And I just thought that was a wonderful metaphor for stillness. That no matter how much partying is going on downtown Chicago or what's happening to the color of the river, that these little tulips are just poking up peacefully right in the midst of all of the activity. So to begin our talk today, we'll start off with this little story that happened in 1992 in Bosnia. A man came into Sarajevo in the middle of a square every day at the same time, and he brought a plastic chair and a cello. And he proceeded to sit down and play. And all around him, there were artillery shells falling on the buildings and people running for cover, because it was the start of the Bosnian Civil War. But this man was the principal cellist of the Sarajevo Opera Orchestra. And he felt that this was his answer to the violence around him, was to play his music. He went there for 22 consecutive days in the middle of the bombing to play and commemorate the 22 people that had been killed standing in a bread line, men, women, and children. The reason why I think this story is a great start to our topic today, the healing power of stillness, is because what we're looking for is to know that in the midst of Chicago at St. Patrick's Day, or in the midst of the Bosnian Civil War, or whatever it may be that's going on in our lives that may feel turbulent at any particular time, that there's that promise of the little tulip bud coming up, or of the music, the mellow strains of the cello that are just overcoming the sounds of violence and war behind it. The stillness that we're looking at today is not an emptiness. It's not a void or just trying to not have anything happen. We're looking for a stillness that's an activity, that's a real conscious knowing of a divine presence of love in each of our lives. That's what stillness is going to represent for us today. a true consciousness of a divine love for each one of us. Now, I don't know about you here in Chicago, but in Boston, where I live right now, the pace of life can be very crazy at times. For young people, like the teenagers my son is friends with, their ability to check Facebook and Instagram and Snapchat in the course of a half an hour is astounding to me, how many times they can send Snapchats and Facebook postings. And so it's a very rapid pace of life, and they accomplish a lot, absolutely, these teenagers. But what I notice is that sometimes it feels like the busyness of our lives, the activity of doing our work and taking care of our families and taking care of our homes, it feels like sort of an 80-20 split at times, that 80% of our lives are taken up by all of that busyness, all of the activity of getting from place to place, sitting in traffic maybe, going to work, the activities that we need to get done. And then 20% is that spiritual time. The time for quiet, the time for church, or the time for study, or the time to just be still and be peaceful. But what if our lives really aren't this 80-20 split, this 80-20 fight? What if what's really going on is that stillness characterizes 100% of true consciousness? And what if we could feel that more regularly on a daily basis? Rather than feel pulled in two directions, like in the morning we may have a moment of respite before we have to rush into the busyness of the day, what if we could feel that constant sense of stillness and peace, characterizing every moment, in the middle of traffic, in the middle of a big group of people, wherever we find ourselves, that we could feel that consciousness of divine love right with us. Does that sound okay? Does that sound interesting? Okay. So that's the promise for today, is that we're going to think a little more about how can we experience that and understand that consciousness is 100% focused on things that are divine, and that we can feel that consciousness more regularly in our lives. Now, in Chicago, I know that the church that's sponsoring this lecture today here in Evanston has been very prayerful about the violence going on in your city nearby. As I was reading up about Chicago recently, I was reading in the Christian Science Monitor newspaper, which was founded by the founder of the Christian Science Church, Mary Baker Eddy. There are actually copies of the Christian Science Monitor to take with you today if you would like one as you leave. In January, they reported that Chicago had a spike in shootings, and that the number of victims of shooting was double the January prior in 2015. And that as of January 2016, the violence was at the highest point it's been since the turn of the century. These are very sobering facts for your city here. And I know that the church that sponsored this talk is really wanting to have this prayerful time today be a time when we come together to offer a prayerful response today. That as you're listening to me today, be also listening to your own heart, to your own inspiration as you're sitting here today, about the prayers and the ideas that are coming to your thought for yourselves and your lives, as well as for your city and your community. Someone told me recently that it's actually not hate that motivates the violence as much as it is fear. And for me, I know in praying about these kinds of situations in our communities, it's important for me to see, how am I overcoming fear in my own life? How am I being free from any moments of fear? And that each time we face down fear in our own lives, we're helping to break it down for our communities. There's a quote from a poet, from an Australian poet named Pam Brown. She said, "At the center of the most turbulent heart," and you can even think the most turbulent city or the most turbulent community, "at the center there is a place of peace, a place beyond time that cannot be touched by change or loss. No tumult can disturb the quietness. No shadow can dim the light. Here, in this stillness, is rest and healing. Nothing we suffer, nothing that we fear can damage its perfection. So right in the midst of whatever it is that we may be praying about or thinking about at any point in our lives, we're looking to connect with that deep, settled sense of peace in our hearts. This stillness is natural. Now, how many of you really enjoy taking a vacation, going to a beautiful spot by a lake or just somewhere quiet? It's a wonderful thing to do, right? You all probably have your own little special spots you can think of in life. And it's wonderful to do that, and it gives us a sense of refreshment, and then we can go back into our busy lives and feel that sense of peace staying with us. But what if we could find this stillness that it's natural even in the midst of our everyday lives? Welcome in the back, glad you're here. What if we can understand this stillness to be God's voice speaking to us? Now, I don't know about you or what concept of God you brought with you today, but let's just suspend any sense of God as being a personification of some gray-haired man in the sky. If any of you have that image, you can just throw it out the window. Or any other personification of a person that judges us or that is trying to approve us in any particular way. The God that Christian Science explains is a God of love. Welcome. Glad you're here. No, it's great. It's a God of love and a God of peace that already has approved of each one of us. We don't have to earn that love. We don't have to do anything to meet up to God's standards. This God is the presence of peace in each heart that loves each one of us for our own uniqueness, our own character quirks, whatever they are, and approves of us already so that we can go forward in life with that sense of love from God. That is the stillness that we're looking for. A conversation with God that is constant and that's always with us wherever we go. The basis for our talk is in the Bible. The Bible has some directives such as be still. It says to be still a few times in the Bible. And if you look through different translations of the Bible and you do a study on what are we supposed to do when we're being still, this is what the Bible says. There's three main things. The first one is to be still and know God. The second one is to be still and to seek God, to look for God, to yearn to understand God better. And then the last theme that comes out as you study this is, it says, be still and commune with your own heart upon your bed, is what it says actually. But communing with your own heart, communing with God. So we're going to look at these three pieces. Seek God, know God, and commune with God. And what does that mean? And how can we do that to practice stillness in our lives? So to start off, to seek God. Jesus said that the kingdom of heaven, does anyone know, where did he say the kingdom of heaven is? Within us, right? He said the kingdom of heaven is within you. So it's not something far off that we have to attain. It's not something we have to study for a certain amount of time to achieve. It's something that we already possess as ideas of the divine creator. So to me, understanding the kingdom within us requires us to understand what it means to be at peace with ourselves. Now, we're going to talk for a minute. I'm going to come out from behind the podium because I want to know what you all think. Can you all still hear me? Can I speak loudly? All right. So I just want to hear from you for a minute. What does it mean, and how do you know when you're actually at peace with yourself? What does it look like? And there's no right answer, so whatever you think. Yes?
Happiness.
Okay, you feel happiness. What else? What else characterizes?
A song in my heart.
Say it again.
A song in my heart.
A song in my heart. Are you a musician?
Well, I appreciate
Yes, he
music
is.
very much.
Excellent. I love it. A song in my heart. Yes, back there.
Being free from worry or anxiety.
Oh, did you read my talk ahead of time?
She just beat me. She
That-
just beat
free.
Exactly, being free. Were you going to say
Yeah,
that too?
exactly the same thing.
Excellent. Being free from worry or anxiety. That's an excellent one. All right, a couple more. Other ideas. How do you know when you're at peace with yourself? You feel calm.
Yeah.
Excellent.
And
Feel
it's
calm.
pretty
Yes.
much-
Feeling cheerful.
Feeling cheerful. Very good. Like happiness. Yes.
Free of any fear. No fear is really racking any.
Excellent. That's also something I noted. Yes, a freedom from fear, worry, concern, anxiety. Yes.
I think when I'm at peace with myself, I feel more connected to others, actually.
Oh, isn't that? She said when she feels at peace with herself, she feels more connected to others. Does anyone else notice that? You know, it's a wonderful thing to notice because we aren't, you know, fear sometimes looks like being afraid of something, but that could look like a lot of things. I know once I was working on a particular healing in my life, and I called a Christian Science practitioner, which is someone who will pray with you when you're wanting to work through something prayerfully. And she asked me if I was motivated by love or fear, and to think about that. And that night as I was going to bed, it occurred to me that there was someone I was avoiding, that I really didn't want to talk to. And I had seen them coming down the street in our town that day, and I'd crossed the street so I didn't have to talk with them. And I hadn't even realized it, but that night I committed myself to no longer doing that. That was motivated by fear. Even if it was just annoyance or just a desire to do something different, but really that was what was motivating me, and that helped with my healing because I realized I wanted to be motivated by love, not fear. All right, one or two more. Yes, you have another one?
Yeah. You feel that nothing's gonna ever, nothing bad's gonna happen to you.
Okay, so you feel nothing bad can happen to you? Yes, one more.
Definitely more connected to the truth.
More connected to the truth, she said. Thank you. Yes.
Having hope.
I know I was.
And feeling hope. Excellent. Feeling hope. Yep.
When I feel that stillness, I mean that really, really peaceful feeling, I feel like I love everybody.
Oh, she says when she feels really peaceful, she feels like she loves everybody. You know, that's what's wonderful about that is that's a natural state to love everybody. I remember at a time in my life when I was grappling with what it meant to find someone to get married to and all of that, and someone said to me, you know, you're not meant to just love one person, you're meant to love everyone. And it just completely expanded my view of what that meant.
You realize that everybody's your family.
Everybody's your family. Thank you very much. So, being at peace with yourself, you feel free from anxiety, free from worry, you feel like you're part of a broader family, a much broader family. You feel a sense of love towards others. One characteristic is that you no longer feel an interest in judging yourself or judging others harshly. Another characteristic, and this is from a poster I used to have when I worked in peace building. There was this little poster and it had these ideas on it, and one of them was that you laugh often. Someone said cheerful, and someone else said happiness. That you laugh more easily. That's a wonderful healing thing to do. Another one is that you no longer have so much interest in worrying about yourself or worrying about others or feeling that sense of anxiety. And a final one is that you're no longer interested in controlling things in life, but you're more willing to let things unfold. I see a lot of heads nodding, right? Yeah. That you don't have to feel in charge all the time. That you can let God and that presence of love be in charge and shepherd you along. It's like feeling the difference between feeling that you have to be the shepherd versus being a sheep. That we can feel shepherded. And that's part of being at peace with ourselves. So Mary Bigaretti, the founder of Christian Science, said this about stillness. She said that we feel God and God's presence in eternal stillness and immovable love. Eternal stillness and immovable love. And what this says to me is that stillness is not something, or peace, is not something that comes and goes based on our circumstances. One of the most radical ideas I think we'll talk about today is that we don't get our thoughts from what happens in our circumstances. Or we don't get our thoughts about other people from what other people do or say. that we get our thoughts directly from that consciousness of God's love, directly from God, from that presence of good. So we don't have to be tempted to react to others' bad behavior or to the bad news that comes about politics, or about crime, or whatever might be going on. That instead of reacting, that we can ask God to show us what we should be thinking about that particular situation. Because our thoughts come directly from that divine presence, that consciousness, and that conversation with God. But that's where the stillness is. And that's what can inform everything that we think. Mary McReady was a woman who knew about eternal stillness and immovable love. That when she was a child, she understood it to the extent that she could stand up to a bully on the playground and defend other children. When she was in her family, she was the peacemaker between her siblings when there was conflict. She would help them resolve the conflicts. And then when she was 17, she went to join her church at that time, but her church believed in the doctrine of predestination, which meant that if you joined the church, you'd be saved, and if you didn't, well, then you were going to hell, and that was the end for you. And she stood up, and as they were inviting her into the membership, and she said, I don't agree with this particular tenet of the church, but I still love God, and I want to be a member. But I don't believe in a God that would punish some and reward others. And you know, they let her in anyway. They said, well, she'll change. Or they might have said that. But, you know, she went on to found her own church on a God that's based on love and acceptance of all. Later in her life, when she was healed of an issue where she was immobile. And then after that, she went on to dedicate her whole life to heal others and to write about it and to help them. You know, she was a woman who lived beyond her expiration date. You know, back then, 100 years ago, you know, women were not expected to live past, 40 or so. And she lived into her 80s. And she had a long life. She did all kinds of things later in her life, and she had she lived beyond the expectations of all around her. There's a story that I think helps us to think about this sense of seeking God and looking for peace in the midst of our daily lives. It happened, it was probably 10 years ago. There was a newspaper that was holding a contest for young children, and the contest was Draw Peace. So all these children drew their version of peace, and they sent in their little drawings. And the one that won was a picture of this huge roaring waterfall, turbulent waterfall. And there was a little tiny ledge behind the waterfall. And there was a tiny little yellow canary singing on the waterfall. Who said a song in my heart, that's peace? That's what this canary had a song in its heart. And it was just singing while the waterfall churned and rushed and bubbled beside it. And that was what won the contest for what peace is about. Now, I've asked myself the question, why wasn't it that the child who might have drawn a beautiful countryside scene with the sun always shining and the flowers always blooming and the perfect little cute house with the flower boxes perfectly tended, why wasn't that the picture that won? Why do you think? Why do you think that picture didn't win the peace contest? What do you think? Why was the water, yeah.
Because
Go ahead. Yeah.
The one with the waterfall was showed peace in the midst of all the uproar and crime and Donald Trump or whatever.
oh, let's not go there. Let's not go there. Wrong place.
But exactly. So he was saying that the one with the waterfall was showing the peace in the middle of whatever might be going on in life. And isn't that profound that this little child saw that peace was about being able to sing with that song in your heart, regardless of the noise around you? That no matter what that noise is, if it is politics, if it's something, if it's crime, whatever that may be, that God gives us an ability to keep singing, to keep listening to that song in our heart and not let it go out. And that is a great contribution to make to our communities in our prayers for peace. All right, so the second directive from the Bible is to be still and to know God. There's a story story in the Bible about Elijah. And he had done a couple of things, and Jezebel, who had some power at the time, decided that he needed to be killed for some of the things he had done. So Elijah flees to the wilderness. He gets out of there and he goes somewhere quiet, like that peaceful, serene lake that you thought of earlier. He goes somewhere for himself to escape being killed, and he's feeling pretty desperate. He thinks that this is the end for him. He doesn't want to go back because he thinks he's just going to get killed, he's going to die. He doesn't know what he's going to do, and he's crying out to God. And there's a huge earthquake, and then a terrible wind, and then a big fire. But the Bible says that God's voice is not in all of the noise. It's like that little canary. It comes in the still, small voice right to Elijah. And it tells him of comfort and of peace, and that his life isn't over, that he has a mission he has to fulfill, and he needs to go back and do it. And he can't hang out in the wilderness too long. He has to go back and face what's coming. And of course, God says he'll protect him, and he'll be with him. This still small voice is the same voice that comes to us. When we have quieted the noise around us a little bit, and we're just listening for that quiet voice amidst whatever's happening. The reason that we can hear it is because of something that it says in 1 Corinthians, in Paul's letter to the Corinthians. He wrote, "We have the mind of Christ." That goes for each one of us in this room. We have the mind of Christ. So what is that mind? What did it look like? What were some qualities of that mind that Jesus represented? Who wants to? Yes.
Love.
Love. Great. What else?
Spirit.
Spirit. Okay. What else?
Humility.
Humility. Good.
Mercy.
Mercy. Someone else is going to say mercy? Yeah. What? Integrity. Good. What else back there?
Power.
Power. What kind of power?
To do good.
Power to do good. Excellent. Yep.
Compassion.
Compassion. All right, so Jesus had all of these wonderful qualities that you just mentioned. He used them for good. He used his power for good. So for example, at one point he's out with his disciples, the people who are following him. They're in a boat on the Sea of Galilee, and a storm comes up, and he's asleep. And the disciples are saying, "We're going to perish. The storm's going to overwhelm us." So they wake him up, and he stands up and he calms the storm. You know, and it immediately stills. At another point in his life, in his experience that we read about, he got word that his good friend Lazarus was really ill and wasn't going to make it. But you know what he did? What did he do next when he found out? Does anyone know?
He went back to find him.
Okay, eventually he went to find him, but before that...
Found his family.
Okay.
Found his sisters, and the sisters said,
Yeah.
went into his room and saved him.
Okay, so he raised him from the dead. He went to find his family. But before that, does anyone know? Yes?
He stayed where he was for 2 or 3 days.
He stayed where he was for 2 days. Yes. Which I find very interesting. So here is Jesus. He hears of this tragedy that's happened to his friend Lazarus, but he doesn't rush up, get in his car. Well, he didn't have a car, right? But he doesn't, he doesn't drive. He doesn't start sprinting all the way to Lazarus, right? He stays where he was still for 2 more days. So he's having this conversation with God. He gets his information about Lazarus not from the phone call, or not a phone call, but not from the word that just got to him about Lazarus being ill. His information about Lazarus comes from what God tells him. That conversation of stillness that allows him to go there and meet with the family and weep with the family and then raise him from the dead. Jesus began his work in the city of Capernaum. And I got to visit this city last fall, and it looks nothing, I'm sure, like it did back then. But what I learned that I loved was that Capernaum means the city of comfort. And I was told this by a Jewish guide, and I thought it was so interesting because in Christian Science, Mary Baker Eddy, who wrote the book of Science and Health with Key to the Scriptures, decided to name her discovery the science of Christianity, she talked about it as the comforter coming to humanity. And I love that this idea that Jesus' ministry began in the city of comfort, that his message was to bring comfort to humanity. That's the mind that each of us has, and that's the way that we know God, by really knowing that sense of comfort and feeling that conversation with God as the primary thing going on in consciousness, the primary thought. All right, so the third point from the Bible, the third directive is communing with God. Communing with our own heart on our bed and communing with God. And I'm just going to read what Jesus said in the Sermon on the Mount. You may know this, but it's a great directive. He says, when you pray, and I'm paraphrasing from the King James, but when you pray, go into your closet. And when you've shut the door, pray to your Father which is in secret, and your Father which sees in secret will reward you openly. It's in the Gospel of Matthew. So go into a closet and shut the door. So when I was a little kid, you know it's coming. He knows it's coming. So I grew up in a house out west of here in Chicago, and it had this huge walk-in closet where my family stored all of their, clothes for the different seasons. There were mothballs everywhere, but it was dark and it was hidden, and I could go hide behind the clothes, and I would bring my Bible and I would read back there with a flashlight when I needed some peace. Because I took it literally. He said to go into the closet, and I did. But does Jesus really mean a literal closet? No.
No, sure.
Well, maybe. It can't hurt. It certainly didn't hurt for me. But going into our mental closet and having that closet moment with God.
Almost like what he did, almost like when Jesus came back to Lazarus. That was his own little closet.
All right, so maybe Jesus was in his own little closet, right? When he was spending those 2 days. It doesn't tell us for sure what he was doing, but he's in that mental space of aloneness with God, of living alone with God. And I don't know about you, but I think there's a temptation sometimes to think that we will be at peace when, and then you fill in the blank. When I've got all my debts paid off. When I can improve the relationship with my family member. When my financial situation improves. When my candidate gets elected. When. That there's something about when my finals are over in college, whatever it may be, that when it's done, that's when I'll find peace. But that's sort of this, it's like the hamster wheel. It kind of keeps cycling. There's always a new when, right? And what we're looking for is to see that sanctuary, that we have that sanctuary or closet on a moment-by-moment basis. So next time you're riding the bus to work or driving in traffic or having a conversation with family members, to say to yourself, how can I have that closet moment right here, right where I am? In the middle of the grocery store, whatever it may be. That we can feel that communion with God on a moment-by-moment basis because God created us to feel it. This isn't something that is initiated by our own human activity. It's something that God initiates for us to know the divine presence better. All it takes sometimes is just quieting the busyness of the human mind to let us hear God. It's initiated by God so that we can know him better. Mary Baker Eddy said that prayer for her was trust, listening, stillness, self-surrender, gratitude, petition, and praise. That was how she prayed in that closet. At one point, she healed a small boy with deformed feet that couldn't walk. His mother was absolutely astonished. And he went on to become a grown man and have a wonderful career. She said in 1892 to one of her students that she felt like that closet, she said, the closet is my home, and God has now given me all of earth that I desire. Can you hear the satisfaction in that? The closet is my home, and God has given me everything I desire. But she was talking about a relationship with God where she knew her needs were met, not through things or stuff or money necessarily, but knowing that that relationship with God was primary in her life. These prayers that she prayed, the listening, the self-surrender, the gratitude, she called them, in her book, she wrote a chapter on prayer, and she says that these were deep and conscientious protests of truth, of man's likeness to God, and of man's unity with truth and love. That we live in a state of unity with God, with that truth and with that love. That's that 100%. That we're not an 80-20 split, partly with God, partly in the human world trying to figure it out. Now, if our prayers are listening and communing with God, what do we do with them? I was in, so again, when I was on that trip, I was in Jerusalem last fall. And I went to the Western Wall with a friend who was Jewish, and he was talking to me about it. And it's the wall where they stick the little pieces of paper in. I don't know if any of you have seen this, but there's many people there praying, and they'll put little pieces of paper in the cracks in the wall. And I was just asking him about this, and I asked him if he'd ever gone and what it meant to him. And he laughed, and he said, so many people think it's like a God mailbox. You stick your paper in and it gets to God. He's like, it's not, it doesn't work like that. He said, you have to go and you have to live your prayer. And I loved that we have to go and we have to live our prayers. That's why each time that we overcome a little bit of fear in our own lives, we're contributing to what happens in for the world. Now, if we have the mind of Christ, what this says also is that that God as mind is our only mind. So anytime you're tempted to think that you have your own mind that's in charge of everything, you can flip that around and say, the only mind I have is God. And this is what that means. Again, it means we can let go of control. It also means we can think broader. That the human mind, if you've ever noticed, likes to focus on little tiny things and repeat them over and over and over and over and over. It likes to notice things about ourselves that we'd like to improve, and it reminds us of them constantly, right? Or if there's someone in our life that we're having trouble with, it'll remind us often. We'll constantly be reminded of the challenge about this person. The human mind is very repetitive. But understanding God as mind is not a broken, well, records are kind of old school, but it's not a repetitive pattern. I don't know if you say broken record anymore, but anyway.
They're starting to make them again.
Oh, they're starting to make records are good again. Okay, great. So it's not a broken record. When I was growing up, meant that it repeated, kind of got stuck and repeated itself over. That's kind of what happens is we get stuck. The human mind can get stuck in repeating itself over and over. Sometimes repeating itself about a prayer or something at once. But what we're looking for is to put off that thought process, to realize that's not our real thinking. That our real thinking is in line with the one mind. And that we get our thoughts from God, not our circumstances. The only demand on us is to see this oneness with God. So in the middle of our busy lives, and all that we have to do, we could ask ourselves, what is the one demand I have today? And that's to commune with God, to seek God, to know God and to commune with God, and to feel that oneness. And then what we see is that our real existence is this dynamic interaction of mind's ideas. And it's like what you said before, that there's a sense of joy, of happiness, of cheerfulness, and we find a peace that we didn't know was there before. All the ideas in the universe of mind fit together perfectly. They're not in conflict. They can't harm one another. And this is the authority that we have to stand up to the violence in Chicago. That as much as these reports about what might be going on in our communities can be very disheartening, someone mentioned not losing hope is part of being at peace with yourself. And that's one of the best things we can do. Because when we hear a news report and we feel hopeless about it, we're part of the challenge, we're part of the difficulty. But making our mental protest that we refuse to give into hopelessness allows us to be part of the solution. That's the goal of the Christian Science Monitor, to be part of that solution for humanity. I find for myself that when I read the Christian Science Monitor, it does that broadening of my thinking that's so wonderful. And it's, if the human mind is tending to get stuck in that repetitive broken record of something, reading the Christian Science Monitor often breaks it open, helps us think beyond ourselves into something much bigger. Sister Joan Chittister, who was co-chair of the Global Peace Initiative of Women, she wrote this. She said, "I cannot help but wonder what would happen to the society around us if we all stopped regularly together to seek the God who is ceaselessly seeking us. To seek the God that is ceaselessly seeking us." Mary Baker Eddy says that our unity with God must be wrought out in life practice. It's on page 202 of her book, Science and Health. That this scientific unity between God and man must be wrought out in our life practice. That's the seeking God who is ceaselessly seeking us every moment. So I have a story for you about how this occurred for me. It was a few years ago now, about 7 years ago, and I was asked to travel in Africa for work. And I decided to rely on prayer rather than all the different litany of long list of medications and things that the doctors recommended that I get when I was going overseas. And I did a lot of praying before I left for this particular country, and felt really clear to know that I was governed by this law of God, that is what Christian Science teaches. The law of good, that says that there's no interruption. It's not good in the United States, but then, well, when you get over to Africa, there might be some challenges, that the law of good operates everywhere. I also had been thinking about the different zones around the world. You know, there's these zones of malarial zones, and then there's, you know, zones that are more developed than others, and the kingdom of heaven isn't broken up into zones. So I had been thinking and reasoning through this a lot, and I got over there and had a wonderful couple of weeks. And then I found myself in a very rural part of Kenya where we were staying in this very simple guest house with just bars for windows out in the middle of the savannah almost. And it had sort of a United Nations issued bed, and there was a mosquito net over the bed. But this particular mosquito net had big holes in it. So I awoke one particular evening in the middle of the night, quite hot in the humidity there, with the mosquitoes just biting right, you know. I had tried to tie up a few of the holes, it didn't quite work, so they were coming through and they were biting me. And as I was sitting there thinking about this experience with the mosquitoes and thinking about my prayers, what came so clearly to me is a voice, it was that still small voice that said, "Laurie, those mosquitoes, they can't give you anything. You can only give them your love." And actually that was so comforting, I fell back asleep. I woke up the next morning, and I slept through the next couple of nights that we were in this guest house. A week later, though, I started to have a bit of a fever and some other symptoms of illness, and it was the day before I was supposed to leave to come back home. And so I got in touch with a Christian Science practitioner that knew I was traveling, and asked her to pray with me to just support the health that I knew was a right of everyone in the country where I was, and to just support that law of goodness that I had been praying with was still in operation, that nothing could interrupt it. And when I got back home to the States, I was still feeling quite ill, and went to welcome my family who was picking me up from the airport, and they were so excited to see me they didn't notice that I was really sick. And so as I was talking with my children who were really excited, and they had bought tickets to a baseball game, the Boston Red Sox. They were really excited. So God told me I could go to the baseball game and I would be okay. And as I did, I just kept defending that law of good in operation for everyone. And to know that I had not gotten anything from those mosquitoes, that I had only given them love. And what also helped in reasoning through this was to realize that the reason I was praying about the claim of malaria wasn't for my own protection as much as it was to lift off the claim that there are regions of the world that are deadly. And as I realized that was something the practitioner and I talked about. And when I realized that, later that night after the baseball game, before I went to sleep, I could feel the fear and the concern and that worry and the anxiety about my own health dissipate. And I could feel my thoughts broadening to that mind that's God, to know that my prayers were for all of humanity, not just for myself. And I woke up the next morning and I was totally free of any fever, of any illness whatsoever. And I made about 15 more trips all over Africa in the next 5 years and never had another problem. So this experience to me represents how this law operates, this law of good. That it's not something that can be broken or interrupted. When you think about the kingdom of heaven, a kingdom is something where there's laws that govern it. And I got thinking about some words that relate to kingdom, like law and harmony and govern. And that if that law was in operation, the law of gravity is a law that just operates without us even really thinking about it. It's the same with the law of harmony. That whether we're consciously thinking about it every moment or whether we're just going about our day, it's still in operation. It doesn't stop working. And that was an experience to me of the way that goodness is unbroken from God. And that conversation with God is the most important indicator of thoughts about ourselves, of what's going on with our health. The peace that we're seeking is not peace in relationship to a physical body that can break down or go wrong. It's a peace in relationship only to our communion with God. Now there's another experience of a woman who had been working in her home and she dropped some glass and it shattered in a million pieces and one of the pieces went into her eye. And she was married and her husband was not a Christian Scientist and he was very fearful and alarmed because he thought she was going to lose her eyesight. So he rushed her to the emergency room of the local hospital. And they took her in right away. They looked at her eye and they said she needed an operation immediately if they were going to save her sight. And she said, can I just have 5 minutes to pray about this or think about it? And they said, only 5 minutes and we're going to set up for the operation. So she left the emergency room and she got on the phone. And she called a Christian Science practitioner to pray with her. And she only had a couple of minutes. And the idea that was shared with her was to see love in operation with every person in the hospital, with every nurse, with every doctor, with her husband, and with herself. And to just embrace them all totally and completely in love. And that was all they talked about. She hung up the phone and she went back into the emergency room. But right before they were about to operate, the piece of glass fell out of her eye. She had been thinking about all these loving thoughts and it just fell out. And the doctors, when they examined her, couldn't find anything wrong. She called the practitioner back within 5 minutes and said, I can't believe this. It fell out of my eye. They don't have to operate. They're sending me home. And her husband was crying. He was just in tears. He had never seen this kind of a dramatic healing with her, and he immediately wanted to understand more about Christian Science, and he went to church with her for a little while after that. But for her, what this was an experience of feeling so enveloped by love that nothing unlike love could be present. And the result was natural, and she was able to go home. This kind of healing relates to what Mary Baker Eddy said about her healing work. The reason we're all here today, the reason I'm here today, is because of this one woman, way back then, that wanted to know how Jesus did his healings. She was so curious about it, and she wanted to be able to practice it for herself. And this is what she said about how she did her healing work. This is written in a book called Christian Healer. She said, I saw the love of God encircling the universe and man, filling all space. And that divine love so permeated my own consciousness that I loved, with Christ-like compassion, everything I saw. This realization of divine love called into expression the beauty of holiness, the perfection of being, which healed and regenerated and saved all who turned to me for help. That kind of divine love has a power. Someone mentioned power is what Jesus represented. That's the kind of power that silences crime, that silences conflict, that changes things going on in the body, that restores them to that perfection that is the reality of each of us. as a divine idea of God. So as we close today, let's think back again to that cellist, the guy sitting in the middle of Sarajevo in the square, playing his cello, not afraid of being hit by a bomb or an artillery shell, offering up a sense of harmony as an answer to violence. This stillness is an awareness of God's love for each of us. It's a stillness that we each have because we have the mind of Christ. To be still is to seek God, to know God, and to commune with God on a moment-by-moment basis. One of the reasons I wanted to talk about this year is because I had been reading about how many programs there were in the United States about mindfulness. They've started mindfulness programs in schools to combat bad behavior and truancy in children in high school, teenagers in high school. And there's a local prep school near me that has a huge mindfulness retreat at the beginning of every school year where all kids participate. And they say it reduces stress and helps these children really be less stressed and approach their studies much better. And it's doing all kinds of positive things for the communities. And as I thought about that, I realized that what we're looking for in that being mindful is to be mindful of God's love for each of us. To be filled with that sense of a divine sense of mind. It's not just about emptying our thoughts from all that's going on, but about filling them with divine love. There's a difference between an absence of conflict and a presence of peace. Peace is not just an absence of conflict or war or problems. Peace is a conscious awareness, a conscious, constant awareness of that divine love for each of us. And that's what we want to be mindful of. That we aren't just emptying our thoughts, but that we are filling them with a clear sense of the way each of us is cared for by this sense of love. Peace isn't just an absence of conflict, but the presence of mercy, of truth, of justice, of those things that you mentioned earlier. Cheerfulness and joy. So as you leave today, you can take that sense with you that we are already 100% communing with God and in touch with that divine presence that speaks to us moment by moment, wherever we are, in the midst of whatever we're doing. That this science of Christianity rejects the fatalism that says that certain areas of the globe are just doomed to unrelenting violence. We can stand up to that perspective in our own lives or in the lives of our communities. And we can register our mental protest against the division and the conflict that we see around us. And that will help us connect with that deep, settled peace that is always ours. Thank you so much for being here today.